Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. President Trump is calling on the investigation into Russian election interference to end. But on Thursday, his national security team said Russia is behind pervasive attempts to interfere in this year's midterms. National Security Advisor John Bolton, Director of National Intelligence Dan Coats, Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen, FBI Director Christopher Wray, and National Security Agency Director Paul Nakasone were all in the briefing room at the White House. They stressed that a major effort was underway to protect this year's midterms and the 2020 presidential election.
Since January 2017, the President has taken decisive action to defend our election systems from meddling and interference.
The President has specifically directed us to make the matter of the election meddling and securing our election process a top priority, and we have done that and are doing that and will continue to do so. In regards to Russian involvement in the midterm elections, we continue to see a pervasive messaging campaign by Russia to try to weaken and divide the United States. These efforts are not exclusive to this election or future elections, but certainly cover issues relevant to the election.
But it's not just risk to our prosperity, privacy, and infrastructure we have to worry about, and that's why we're here today. Our democracy itself is in the crosshairs. Free and fair elections are the cornerstone of our democracy, and it has become clear that they are the target of our adversaries who seek, as the DNI just said, to sow discord and undermine our way of life.
So make no mistake, the scope of this foreign influence threat is both broad and deep.
U.S. Cyber Command and the National Security Agency are tracking a wide range of foreign cyber adversaries and are prepared to conduct operations against those actors attempting to undermine our nation's midterm elections.
Zeke Miller is a CBSN political contributor and White House reporter for the Associated Press. And Ed OKeefe is a CBS News political correspondent. They join me now from Washington. All right, Ed, let me start with you. Why did we get this kind of briefing from national security officials now?
Well, the president had met with them last week to discuss these issues. And, of course, it's been in the news essentially ever since he went to Helsinki to meet with the Russian president and declined to take on Russian President Putin to his face. We also have seen in recent days Democratic senators say that they have been targeted either by attempted hackers or people impersonating government officials from Eastern Europe, suggesting that they may be somehow tied to Russian entities that are trying to infiltrate the elections and the American political system. To see the Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coats, today reaffirm that Russia is trying to do that, is meddling, is trying to create instability in the political system, is just the latest reminder that this is ongoing. But notably, he made clear it is not as sophisticated, not as intense as it was ahead of the 2016 elections, and yet pointed out we're only in August. There's still a few more months, of course, until November.
And Zeke, DNI Dan Coats said the president directed them to make election meddling a top priority. Has it been a top priority for the president so far?
Well, not publicly. We haven't really heard this message from the president himself. There have been occasional moments where he has sort of cast it off as an offhand remark. But in terms of, we have not seen the president come out the way that people who work for him come out and deliver this sort of direct-to-camera, very long, take questions about this issue of election interference, whether it be from Russia or from other actors, and what his administration is doing about it. He's sort of spoken in generalities, both in terms of directing his staff and in terms of the way he has described the 2016 effort. But really, outside of tweets and the occasional quick soundbite, we haven't heard this message from the president himself. And you talk to Republicans and even Democrats and even Republicans on Capitol Hill, they'll say, the fact that the president isn't speaking about this issue, this isn't the sort of issue that you can just delegate to staff. There needs to be a whole of government response here. The White House has to coordinate it, but the president has to lead it. So, we heard Ambassador Bolton, the National Security Advisor, say that there have been 2 National Security Council meetings chaired by the president since he got to the White House a couple of months ago on this subject, but we really haven't seen that reflected in the president's rhetoric so far.
Well, this briefing came on the same day as a bipartisan group of senators introduced new sanctions on Russia. Ed, you asked DNI Coats about sanctions. What did he say?
He said that there are sanctions right now, obviously, on Russian officials, but he would welcome more of it. if there's the will to do it, and essentially said, look, all of this pressure seems to be an appropriate response, and said, if there's a will to do it, he has no issue with it at all.
And what would these sanctions do, Ed?
The ones introduced today? Mm-hmm. They continue to put pressure on Russian officials regarding the interference that is underway or that's been attempted in these elections right now, and then would essentially target them for what's been done in the past. There is bipartisan will, certainly in the Senate, to some extent in the House, to do this and to continue to do it as necessary as the elections continue.
Well, Zeke, DNI Coates also said he's not in a position to fully understand what happened in Helsinki between President Trump and Russian President Putin. Should he be in a position to understand that?
Well, in a normal administration, presumably, yes. I mean, it is normal, in any administration for the president to have a conversation with another foreign leader. But it is very unusual for somebody in his position not to be fully read in on the substance of that conversation. It really does point to just how small the circle around the president is when it comes to issues of national security. This team who was out there in the briefing room today may have been they may be responsible for the agencies that lead the election security effort, but really only John Bolton, is very close to the president. When Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was at the CIA, he was also in that inner circle of national security professionals. Now that he's at Secretary of State, he's in more of a diplomatic role. So much of the foreign policy, so much of President Trump's actions and communications with foreign leaders are constrained to a very small circle around him, and that's the sort of thing where usually you would expect that the director of national intelligence would be briefed on those issues, but apparently he doesn't feel comfortable and fully informed enough in order to be able to answer questions about that. And that is, it is not necessarily, that is not troubling necessarily, but it is striking to hear and also points to it's revealing about the way the Trump administration operates.
Well, we also learned Thursday that the National Archives may not finish reviewing documents regarding Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh before the end of October. Ed, why would it take that long? And is that a problem for the White House?
Well, you're dealing with at least 900,000 pages of work that Kavanaugh did during the Bush administration, both at the Justice Department when he was the senior official there and when he was staff secretary here at the White House. Staff secretary is literally the person that touches almost every piece of paperwork that the president sees or reviews over the course of his day. The archives made clear to the Senate Judiciary Committee today it would take them until probably late October to review it all. By comparison, they pointed out that they only had to offer up about 70,000 pages of documents when it came time to review the nomination of John Roberts to serve on the Supreme Court back during George W. Bush's administration. Roberts had served in the Reagan White House. So they're saying, look, by sheer magnitude of the number of pages that we've got here, we don't have the manpower or the time necessarily to do this. This is exactly what Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell warned the White House about, that Democrats would continue to push for as much of the documentation backing up his professional career in the executive branch as possible, and that it could potentially prolong the nomination. Republicans insist that they will continue with this. The plan is to hold a hearing in September, but you're going to continue to see Democrats say, how can we be holding hearings on this guy? How could we possibly consider holding a confirmation vote if we haven't had a chance to review what he wrote, what he did, what he touched when he was part of the Bush administration? And that debate over, the scope of the document review is one that will continue to sort of play out at a lower level here in Washington, when the stark political reality is that right now, at least, it looks as if Brett Kavanaugh probably has enough support among Republicans to get him through, and potentially, eventually, will have at least one or two, maybe three or four moderate Democrats voting for him as well. And until or unless there's some sign that there are Republicans breaking away from the Kavanaugh confirmation, this whole conversation about a document trail is kind of moot and a distraction from the reality, which is that he still appears headed towards confirmation. And that's part of the reason why they want to look at these documents. Democrats believe that there may be something in there that at least raises questions that deserve to be asked in public. We'll see whether or not they get to do that.
But Ed, what about midterms? So could the document delay help vulnerable Republicans, or Democrats rather, in any way?
Well, if there's no vote before the election, sure. But the plan right now, if you're Senate Republicans, is to hold that vote at some point in either late September or October, make it a midterm election issue in the last few weeks of the campaign, and continue to put pressure on people like Joe Manchin of West Virginia, Joe Donnelly of Indiana, Heidi Heitkamp of North Dakota, maybe Claire McCaskill of Missouri or Bill Nelson of Florida, and say, look, if all these Republicans are voting for him, you've got no reason to do it, especially if you voted for Neil Gorsuch last year.
Well, on another issue here, Ivanka Trump broke with her father in an interview Thursday. Here's what she said when asked if the media is the, quote, enemy of the people.
I've certainly received my fair share of reporting on me personally that I know not to be fully accurate. So I've, I have some sensitivity around why people have concerns and gripe, especially when they're sort of feel targeted. But no, I do not feel that the media is the enemy of the people.
So Sarah Sanders, as you both know, would not say the same at the press briefing, but President Trump tried to clarify it, saying, quote, fake news is the enemy of the people. Zeke, did you expect a different kind of response from the White House?
Not particularly, given the way we've seen in this White House, often people who speak on behalf of this White House speak for an audience of one, for the president himself. That the president doesn't like to see weakness or apologies or anyone trying to really interpret his words too much when he believes that what he is saying is correct. And this aggressive rhetoric from the president over the last year and a half, he started this over a year ago, really, with the way he's describing the press, is something he has stood by and used to and weaponized really to amp up his supporters and get them engaged and essentially drive a wedge between the American electorate that he can exploit from an electoral perspective and as while he's governing. It's not exactly helpful to anyone other than him. There's a selfish motivation here that's pretty obvious if you look at the polling. If you talk to any of his supporters at a rally, it's very clear why he is doing this. But it was not surprising there to hear Sarah sort of not quite walk that back and try to sidestep it, saying she's there to speak for the president, which is an interesting way of looking at that job. If you look back in history, there have been times where there are press secretaries who are speaking for the president. Oftentimes in that job, you're also speaking for the United States. In that moment, I think it's pretty fair to say she was speaking. Really, she was saying what the president wanted to say and wanted her to say, not so much what she wanted to say, and also what the American people wanted to hear her say on their behalf.
Yeah, that's
well. And Elaine, yeah. Elaine, what's also kind of unique about what went on today is she was speaking for herself.
Right.
She personalized it. She pointed out that she herself has been the target, that she requires Secret Service protection, that she was kicked out of a Virginia restaurant in late June, that she was the target of some pretty nasty jokes at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. You don't normally see the press secretary in that position make it about themselves. She did again today. I think she understands it's because the president and the president's supporters especially see her as a loyal lieutenant. And so to continue to personalize these attacks, not only on the president but on her, it helps generate some sympathy and bolster that political support for the president.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a really notable part of her response there. Well, Zeke, you are also reporting that the special counsel has a new proposal for a potential Trump interview. What's in that proposal?
Well, this is coming from people close to this investigation, and they are saying that the special counsel still wants to sit down physically with the president and interview him in person. That sort of comes from that back and forth where one of the counter offers from the president's legal team was to do this either by some sort of back and forth written communication, and that the special counsel was willing to curtail his acts to the president about obstruction of justice, but was still going to ask him about the subject. It's not in the same level of depth that we had seen from some of those questions that had leaked out earlier this year. We're waiting to hear back whether that is something that would be acceptable to the Trump team. Obviously, Rudy Giuliani and others on the president's legal team have been pretty clear that they don't want the president talking to the special counsel regardless of the circumstance, because they believe that only gets him into potential further jeopardy. Outside lawyers will tell you it's probably, if you're potentially under investigation, it might not be the best thing to put yourself under oath and to sit down with prosecutors of the FBI. That said, so this is the president of the United States. This is Donald Trump. He does things his own way. He's been pretty vocal about how he wants to sit down with Rob Mueller. He has nothing to hide. So we will see if this is enough to sort of get him to override the counsel of his attorneys, but that remains to be seen right now.
All right, fascinating open question still. Zeke Miller and OKeefe, thanks to you both.
Thank you.